You've reached the Signal Watch, movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I am your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today is...
Simon Day again, hello.
And we watched...
Total Recall from 1990, directed by Paul Verhoeven, and starring Arnold Schwarzenegger as Quaid and Hauser. We'll talk about that later. Rachel Ticotin, I think, as Melina. Sharon Stone as Laurie. Ronnie Cox as Cohagen, Michael Ironside as Richter.
Michael Ironside.
My personal favourite, Robert Picardo as Johnny Cab. Yeah, no, fantastic movie. Another Arnie classic, basically.
Yeah, this is part of the ArnieFest series, and I very much remember seeing this one in the theater. It was back when Austin, Texas had the Arbor 4, and that was kind of the prestige theater to go to in town, up in North Austin. And with this movie, they started a thing where a host would come down, like basically one of the ushers, and welcome you to the Arbor 4. And the crowd was... enthusiastic, to put it mildly. Like, people were really excited to be there for a big budget Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, and I had seen this this kind of happened a bit more, but they were basically there to really do the thing the Alamo does, tell you to shut up. But they did it in kind of a fun way of, like, let's all enjoy the movie together. You can cheer, you can do whatever, but the crowd was into it, and was into it straight through the entire movie.
Wow. So I'm jealous of that. I didn't do that. I could, so compared to Commando and Predator, I could have actually seen this at the theater. I was old enough. But I didn't go. I remember it must have been on while I was at school, though, high school, because two of my teachers went. I had an economics teacher, a guy, and my English teacher, a woman who were married, and he in particular said, we're going to go and see Total Recall tonight. And then the next day they told us. And they were very poo-pooey about it. They were very down there. They were very much like, they ruined the book. They turned it into this ridiculous Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, action movie, and it's really stupid.
Oh.
And I remember thinking, A, you're wrong, even though I haven't seen it. And B, I bet I'd like it. And about a year later, I think it was probably the first Paul Verhoeven movie I saw when I rented it, probably on video. And it actually made me probably go back and search out RoboCop.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely pitched here as not a heir to RoboCop or anything, but from the director of RoboCop, sort of thing. So you knew you were going to be getting this kind of high octane action.
Hit some people's heads blowing off.
Yes. Yes.
Can I just say, actually, watching this yesterday, I was laughing because there's like 30 seconds in this where a woman exposes herself, Michael Ironside shoots her, and then a midget gets on a bar with a machine gun. And I'm like, There you go. That's Paul Verhoeven. That's all you need.
I don't know if the kids will ever really appreciate that scene for what it is. Like because
I think
there
the
just weren't
people.
scenes like that in movies back then, and
Well, now the people complaining about movies now, I think they would implode if you showed them that 30 seconds.
yeah, and I had such like a sense of glee during that of him like the big burly bartender like tossing the Uzi or whatever to the little person who jumps up on the bar, and she leans into it, man. She's into that sequence.
It's brilliant.
Um,
And then that creepy guy with the glasses gets stabbed in the gut. It's just non-stop violence and gore and sex. It's brilliant.
but yeah, so it is based on a Philip K. Dick book. I am sure Philip K. Dick. I mean, most of his stuff that got translated into movies, he didn't particularly care for.
He's
but,
like, what's that? That's not my book.
Yeah, but at the same time, it does keep kind of Philip K. Dick's memory alive. I've never actually read the story or book that this is based on. I've read about 4 of his books. They're all good.
So
really enjoy them.
We Can Remember It For You Wholesale is the name of the book, isn't it?
Say again?
We Can Remember It For You Wholesale is the name of the book. And actually, so the screenwriters Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Sucho, who did Alien, they were working on this before Alien, and they went through about 40 drafts. And it's funny you say that about Philip K. Dick, because I think he was still around, and he wasn't too, like you say, he wasn't too happy with the script. But this went through a lot of development hell. Dino De Laurentiis had it for a while. David Cronenberg was about to direct it and rewriting it for a while, and he actually kind of like slowly fell out with the producers because he actually pulled it further back to the book. They went, "You've actually made it more like the book again," and they went, "Well, we wanted kind of Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of action," which is funny because I think one of the reviews when it came out actually said, this isn't anything like the book; it's more like Raiders of the Lost Ark. So the producers must be like, "Yay, it worked."
We won. Yeah.
But it went through a lot of kind of development hell, and then finally, I think De Laurentiis either went bankrupt or just sold the rights. I think he felt burnt after Dune, so he sold the rights for $3 million, which was a bargain price to Arnie, and Arnie actually kind of set up the deal with is it Calco?
Yeah.
And basically he bought in. So Arnie had a fantastic deal where he got 10 to 11 million for starring in it. He got 15% of the profits. He got basically say over everything, like co-stars, producer, director, promotion. And he's the one that actually brought in Verhoeven, because I never knew this. I don't know if you did, but Arnie was in the running for RoboCop, which I'm kind of glad he didn't do because it's too close to Terminator, I think.
Yeah.
But he'd been talking to Verhoeven before, so he brought him in, and then Verhoeven brought in a lot of the team he'd used on RoboCop: the cinematographer, the production designer, the editor, Rob Bottin for effects, and Ronnie Cox, of course.
Of course, yeah.
Venture corporate villain. Yeah, so it's interesting, but yeah, it was a very, very kind of like windy road to get to where it ended up.
I'm not entirely surprised to hear that. I mean, just seeing Dan O'Bannon's name on a film, you kind of know it probably was a development hell for a long time. I don't know what. Yeah, and I did see that on the credits, which I had never noticed before, or I had forgotten since college. I mean, it's honestly probably been 10 or 15 years since I've watched Total Recall again from beginning to end. It's one of the ones that it runs on cable enough that I'll sit and watch 20 minutes of it. But it's, it's like, I know I can fill in all the blanks, both before and after. I don't need to watch all of Total Recall, but you should, because it's a heck of a thrill ride, and it's a smart thrill ride.
It is very small.
I always had mentally, because of when they came out, packaged this with The Running Man.
Yeah, which is kind of crappy, really. I mean, the Running Man, I'm not a big fan of, really.
I am.
You-
But it's just because of the era of Schwarzenegger. But also, Running Man is weirdly predicts the future that was coming, much as
yeah,
RoboCop did, in a way that's a little unsettling when you're watching it. Like, I would fully believe if someone wanted to do Running Man right now, some TV network would pick it up.
but
I'll
it's the
just put it
same as
that
when
way.
they did the 1970s Rollerball, which is, of course, supposed to be, it would be terrible if we got to this stage. And then straight after the film came out, some team went, "We're trying to like make rollerball like work," and it's like you kind of missed the point there. And guys going around with chainsaws on motorbikes, it's like that's not a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, Death Race 2000 is it's amazing NASCAR hasn't decided that that's what they're gonna do, and maybe they will because they're not going to make it out of the quarantine correctly.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's anyway. But Total Recall and Running Man were kind of the two things I always kind of package in my mind as being kind of these like smarter than they needed to be. Because if you think about this era, this is pretty much just as canon is kind of dying out.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that was kind of where everyone had mentally level set an action movie. I think like Commando is kind of like the very high level canon film. And
I think
then
also
you
Stallone had kind of run out of steam a bit at this point. I think his movies, he didn't really know what to do himself.
yeah, I mean, so you start getting into like we talked about like the genre mashing and Predator, and at this point, he's gone ahead and leapt straight into the genre.
Yeah,
It's definitely an actioner, which a lot of sci-fi prior to this would have been people standing around and talking about concepts. This movie
well, it's
does
very
not
funny.
stop for that at all. They're like, don't worry, it's something to do with air. That's all you need to know. We're going to keep going.
It's also funny thinking that, like in the book, I mean, the original drafts of the script, Quaid was supposed to be played by people like Richard Dreyfuss, and William Hurt and Patrick Swayze, which I guess he's straddling the line a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, like he could probably do the splits and jump over people. But it's just hilarious thinking in a parallel universe there's Richard Dreyfuss running around. I want to see Richard Dreyfuss in the Paul Verhoeven version. Actually, that'd be great.
Oh, that would be amazing. Yeah, I mean, I know that there was
Oh
like
shit!
a TV movie or something, an adaptation of Overdrawn at the Memory Bank or something like that preceded this. Is that correct?
They made that reboot with Colin Farrell in about 2014, which was pretty much just a remake. But then they also had a TV show called Total Recall 2070, which I haven't seen, but apparently it strays away from this story pretty quickly and more into like Blade Runner territory.
Okay.
So it doesn't really.
I'd forgotten
And
that existed. Both of those things existed. So,
they were both pretty forgettable. Interestingly, though, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but this did have a sequel proposed, which was going to be Arnold Schwarzenegger again, playing the same character. The problem you have, though, is like, I think even more than a normal sequel, it's like you can't really do the next day in this guy's life. You know what I mean? Because for a start, it spoils the end of this film, and the ambiguity of that. But it's like, yeah, the sequel was going to be basically Minority Report, which of course Spielberg made years later. So it's going to be, Arnold goes to work, in a law office where you can predict future crimes, what's going to happen next. And it's kind of like, yeah, that's not really a sequel. That's a totally different film.
yeah. So you have breached the big topic of this movie, and it's an interesting one because I think that there's people who, if you're listening to this podcast, I know you're already probably on board with,
Yeah, massive
all of the
spoilers.
what is actually happening of the movie. I took screenwriting in about 1997, so that you're talking only about 7 years after this movie came out, but I'd seen this movie at age like 15, so originally, and then several times afterward, and watched it again, of course, in college. And in my screenwriting class, we were talking about movies that were better than you kind of give them credit for.
Yeah.
And this was one I brought up, and I started talking about how, well, because you don't really know if he's actually just gone crazy,
Yeah.
or if he's, and people were just looking at me, and I was like, you missed the entire point of the movie. And they were like, what? It's like, and I was
Yeah.
like, go back and watch this movie, because then that happens a lot. People see a movie, they don't really care for it for whatever reason. And if you aren't paying attention at the beginning of Total Recall, you are going to miss the fact that maybe none of this is actually happening. So do you want to go through kind of the clues on that?
Doesn't it all kind of boil down to, did he actually have the memory put in? Because we never see that happen.
Mm-hmm.
We see him like kind of relaxing and choosing like, his favorite female body type or whatever. And then basically the next thing is like, something's gone wrong quick, he's gone crazy. And now the scientist says he's having repressed memories, but I haven't loaded it yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of interesting.
But that's after he supposedly, you don't know anything after that shot of him kind of leaning back.
And there's a great line early on. I wrote it down, but now I can't find it. But it's like it's something like, they say it's so good you won't want to come back.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's so many like little hints in this that it could be a dream. I was also trying to write down yesterday stuff that he isn't actually there when it's happening. So, you've got Sharon Stone talking to Michael Ironside.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, so is that real? Is that actually happening? Or is he thinking that's happening without him there?
I mean, I think it is the rare movie. Like, I know, like, when Inception came out, I had people sending me fan theories and whatever of like, don't you think? And I'm like, Inception is one of those movies also like this one where just understand it's going to end with ambiguity. You're never going to get closure. The director's never going to be like, well, it's actually this. They're not going to Ridley Scott the end of Blade Runner for you necessarily, right?
But also Inception is pretty straightforward compared to this, because Inception is just like, you go down different levels of dreaming. You are definitely dreaming. And each level slows down time even more. Mm-hmm. So like a minute on the bottom level is like, 10 years on the top level. Whereas with this, I feel like they're almost like catch and bait with you. They were like playing with you a lot more because, is it all Cohagen's plan? Because I love the fact that also Arnie himself, and they kind of played with this a little bit in Terminator 3, where momentarily he got reprogrammed to go back to being a bad Terminator, except they kind of chickened out. They didn't really use it. But I like the fact in this, is Arnie originally a really nasty piece of work? You never really get a definite answer for that. Because, you have different versions of him saying, I met a woman and she kind of changed my mind about what I was doing, which to me sounds a bit lame. It's like, if you were like this hardened mercenary, would you suddenly meet somebody and go, actually, my entire life, I'm going to stop being an evil mercenary now. My entire life's been, badly spent. So you never know whose version is true, really.
Yeah, there's tons of levels of that in this movie, of where you don't really ever know who Quaid Hauser was he a guy who got mucked about with multiple times? I'd been going back and forth with Stuart this week because he watched The Sixth Day, which is as close to that as in some ways as this, of like, you had all these kind of clones of him running around of like, who's the real Arnie, and this just does it within a single body. It kind of predicts what they did later in I've only read the one book of Altered Carbon, but kind of the idea of, now you're talking about a single personality moving between bodies. You can kind of drop someone's brain or personality into, they call bodies sleeves in that book, and I guess on the TV show, which I haven't watched. But this is much more, if you have a single body and we keep mucking about with memories and who's, and what was real to this person. Now that said, he from beginning of this to the end has the memory of being a construction worker who somehow is married to Sharon Stone, which
it's a bit Jason Bourne as well, isn't it? Really, It's like, oh, I can suddenly kill 6 people. How do I do that?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that's where you were talking about the Richard Dreyfuss thing.
That would be great.
I can't imagine Richard Dreyfuss in a scene, had that been the same script, which, that's probably not how they would have handled it for that scene. But
Richard Chamberlain was originally Jason Bourne in a movie back in the early 80s, I think.
But Richard Chamberlain's like 6'3" and like fit.
Have Joe Pesci. Joe Pesci.
Okay, there you go.
But just give him a pen. So yeah, I love talking about all this though. I love the ambiguity, and I love especially the scene with Dr. Edgman, where he comes in and he's trying to convince him, you need to take this pill.
Yeah, when I was 15, that blew my mind.
Yeah. It's just so cool. And like the bead of sweat, going down the forehead. It's so good.
And it's also the one thing in the entire film that makes me wonder.
Yeah.
Of like, okay, well, was that part of the program? Was that?
Yeah.
Because you'd have to count on the fact that he had seen in your writing your program that he had seen all those commercials, which is probably realistic if he's at Total Recall.
Yeah.
But
well, also Cohagen. So I never, even watching this yesterday, I was a little bit. You helped me out with this. Cohagen had his mind wiped, and then stuck him on Earth to keep him out of the way, with Sharon Stone and a bunch of other people watching him. But I thought Cohagen wanted the information about the alien artifact from him. So is he just waiting for him to kind of reboot?
He needs to have his brain completely wiped and to believe he is Quaid, so that he will
lead them through the people.
He'll come back and find Quato. It's all about finding Quato.
Yeah.
And because they can't figure out where Quato is, but they think that whatever woman that Hauser had met, or Quaid, or whoever had met, could lead him to Quato. So it was a very loop-de-loop way of doing it, because he says Michael Ironside was never in on it, and I don't think Sharon Stone was either. They just knew if he gets triggered by anything, he got triggered too early. They had some plan, because he had the construction guy he was working with who was supposed to be keeping an eye on him. Sharon Stone was supposed to. So you have him covered about 20 hours a day at this point.
And they all want to stop him talking about we're going to Mars, which to me, I'm like, isn't that the point though?
I think they were told to keep him from talking about Mars. I don't think they were fully in on it. I think eventually the idea was Ronnie Cox was going to go, okay, now we're going to actually set off whatever the trigger thing is to trick him into going back. But it was too early, because he makes some comment about, well, crap, this is all happening faster than it was supposed to, because
that's true.
Because of, whatever. And you can, whether it's resurfaced memories or whatever. So yeah, I think that was the goal, was really just to find Quato.
I mean, what I love,
your mind.
Get your ass to Mars. What I love about those early scenes though is the cheese. There's some wonderful cheese running all the way through this. Not bad cheese, good cheese. Like the fact that, basically Arnie's just like, no, Sharon Stone, I do not want to have the sex with you. I want to watch the news. And he's got this fantastic wife who's like, he's not remotely interested in. And she's like kissing him, going like, I love you so much. And then like doing evil looks at the camera when she's by herself. And it's just so good. It's so good. It's so rewatchable,
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a brilliant little bit, which I hadn't really noticed yesterday, but I think after his escape from Sharon Stone the second time, and Michael Ironside's like basically on the video phone, and he's like, I'm coming up. And she goes, okay, and she blows him a kiss, and he just kind of goes, wow. Like, as if those doing like cat claws at that. And I was just like,
I thought he was like rubbing the screen as if he was like touching her face. Like he is deeply in love with her, and they're not together.
I thought he was going,
no. Memory.
And I'm like, they must have improv that. There's so much stuff in here that's like so silly.
Well, this I believe is her first, at least, major film role. I think up till this point, like this was her big breakout thing. I remember people talking about her after this movie of like, she's beautiful and she's so good in this, and
I think she might have been in one of the police academies.
Yeah, I think she had been kind of kicking around Hollywood. She'd done like a Playboy spread, I think, just before this, or came out after this.
Yeah,
and so this was really her big star turn moment.
Well, it's almost like an audition reel for Basic Instinct, because she's really good in this. I mean, everybody is, but she really sells it. She's excellent, and the fighting. She's obviously very sexy. And it's funny, actually. I watched just by accident. I watched it kind of like there's something about Sharon Stone relaxing by the pool with her friend the other day, and I guess now she's in her mid-60s, but she still looks fantastic now. And I'm like, wow, she's really, whatever she's doing, she needs to keep on doing it because it's working. But I mean, you can see why Verhoeven went, And well, the funny thing is about Basic Instinct is after this, I think, maybe they were producer bound to try to get a big name. But I think Verhoeven all the way through it kind of kept saying, I want Sharon Stone. And finally, because no other actresses would do it or take their clothes off, he got her. But she's so good. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer now when you watch this.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't interesting. I don't know how all that was discussed in England. By the time, there was a certain level of like, well, Total Recall fan who knew who she was at this point.
Yeah.
And by the time that movie came out, I mean, that was her, of course, elevation. Now she's a household name thing. And I did go see it opening night with two of my dude friends. That's all I remember about it. But it, other than the place was sold out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Everyone was very curious. There were a lot of adult movies coming out around this window. It was like this, and then like Crying Game, I think, was like 6 months later, or within that window. So yeah, we're having adult themed movies actually coming out at that point, which that's all now made its way to television. We don't do that anymore at the movies.
Well, also, it just showed the quality difference between, because since this lockdown's happened, I'm a big Paul Verhoeven fan anyway. Like I say, after seeing Total Recall, Harley on video, I think I've seen each one of his new movies at the theatre, and I went back and watched, his stuff in the Netherlands. And it's interesting because his career kind of runs a little bit parallel to Arnie's, and I'm sure Arnie wanted to work with him because of the European sensibility. But, he made Flesh and Blood around the same time Arnie did The Terminator. I think Flesh and Blood wasn't a big hit in the theatres, but I think it did okay on rental. And then, of course, they both had unexpected hits with Predator and RoboCop, which, were much bigger than, I guess, people expected them to be. So this is really them kind of cashing their chips, now. They both got some power, especially Arnie. And it's like, this you can feel compared to Predator and Commando that this is a star vehicle. Really, and he's pretty in control of his career at this point.
Well, it's also a weird movie because, I mean, we talk about Sharon Stone, but we also talk about how she was not a household name at this point. Yeah. And nobody else, I mean, Michael Ironside's just Michael Ironside, right? I mean, but he's kind of the second biggest name in this movie.
Yeah.
I mean, Ronnie Cox was known, but I mean, he was more of like, oh, that guy, sort of actor. At this
I think Ronnie Cox might have one of my favourite one-liners from this. The one-liners in this aren't as memorable as Predator, but I think there's still some great ones. And Ronnie Cox just says something like, I'm going to kill everybody and then still be home in time for cornflakes.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, where do you get that from? That's fantastic.
So evil.
He means he can do all this before breakfast. That's what he So there's some great
nobody's going to hit that line the way Ronnie Cox does.
He sells it. He sells the cornflakes.
But yeah, so yeah, it's not like it's Verhoeven and Schwarzenegger are the stars of the movie,
Yeah.
and everybody else is just kind of along for the ride.
Well, you're right. It's just a bunch of good character actors.
Mhm. It
You know,
has the
this is.
guy who plays Quado, whose name I can never remember. Who
I like that
was
the
in.
guy who plays Benny as well. He's cool, the taxi driver.
Yeah. Well, that guy, I didn't see him in a ton of other stuff. The guy who played whatever and Quado, he
Mm.
was in a bunch of stuff around this time,
Yeah.
and always kind of played kind of more like laconic guys or stern generals who are a little taciturn.
Yeah. Well, also yesterday, I didn't notice this. It's the first time I've ever noticed this, only because I spent the last few weeks working my way through Breaking Bad. But basically, Dean Norris plays Tony, who's the guy where he goes like, you got a nerve showing your face around here. He goes, look who's talking,
But that's Dean Norris.
That's Dean Norris under there, yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my god.
So, it's kind of, I mean, once you know that, you can totally tell it is him.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. No, I never put two and two together on that. I mean, because of the makeup. There was one point in the movie, and I meant to go back and rewatch it, where I thought they had switched the sides, and I didn't know if they flipped the film or if someone was playing a joke. But I need to go back and make sure it always stays on the same side of his head, because that's a little too Young Frankenstein if it's switching back and forth.
It's kind of Roger Corman. I want to see the version of Total Recall though, where instead of secret agent, he picks UPS delivery man instead at the start. I have to deliver the package.
You just blew the thought I had in my head away of what to talk about next.
Well, while you're regathering your thoughts.
I remember what it was. Go ahead. I'll save it for later.
Did you notice the joke? I think it was a joke. I'm presuming it was where Arnie walks in, and he has to use the kind of like I guess like the electronic office finder, and he presses McLean. And yes. I'm like, is that off Die Hard? Is that like a Die Hard nod? I'm sure it is.
I wondered about that. It seemed really weird, and it still does. Yeah. I mean, McLean just means something in movie land, even by 1990. So
yeah.
Go ahead.
It's almost exactly the same as the thing out of Die Hard. I'm like, they just made such a fuss of that in Die Hard. But I'm like, that must be a little wink, I think.
Right, yeah. Couldn't put in Holly Gennaro. So the thing I was going to talk about are the two things that people remember being particularly creepy, because there's gore and violence. We're all used to that in movies in the 80s and into 1990, especially if we'd seen any Paul Verhoeven.
I've got something to say about that in a minute, though, but carry on.
But it's funny, I was actually listening to the guys who manage my comic shops podcast, and they were talking a little bit about Total Recall. And all they would talk about is how creepy Johnny Cab is and how creepy it is when they do the asphyxiation faces and the like. And that's something that's right.
Arnie does that so many times during the film, and it's great. It's like, because I think in Predator we were saying a couple of them made really good noise when Bill Duke, I think, made really good noises when he died.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like Arnie in this is like, whoa, he's going the extra mile. He's like, yeah.
I would have loved to have been in the sound recording booth that day of like, okay, now this is the part where you're strangling. You're not getting any air. What does that sound like, Arnie? And he's just in there. Yeah, it's such a crazy sound. I can't do it, obviously.
Also, I think if your eyes did pop out that far, you probably wouldn't go back to normal.
No, you need at least some serious glasses after that.
No, it's just so well done, isn't it? It's just so well done, and like you say, it's quite meta, a bit like Last Action Hero. I mean, it's definitely you can, like you said originally, you can watch it on several different levels, and enjoy on each one, I think. And I'm sure there are people who just go in and watch it as an Arnie action film, without really thinking about it.
Yeah. And when we talk about, there is the setup. We haven't even talked about some of the clues. Like, when he goes into Total Recall, we talked about them choosing the female, and basically they show Rachel, how did you pronounce her last name?
Takotin, I think.
Yeah. They show basically her on the screen, but which because you don't know who she is yet in the movie, and she hadn't been in a ton of stuff, so she was not a star.
No.
They also say, like, the tech looks at the screen and says blue skies on Mars. That's new. They say, do you want it? We're going to have like creatures, so there's going to be a two-headed monster, and when you start putting all that together, but it's all flying by. You're not thinking about, like, it's like trying to listen to someone else's burger order. You're just, the only thing you're maybe paying attention to is, that he sounds like he likes something different from what he has at home for women.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like, I mean, supposedly that was a hangover from Cronenberg as well, like the mutants. He came up with that idea, which I think is, it's a little bit Clive Barkerish as well with Nightbreed. But it's a really good idea. The fact that, I guess the good people are the ones that kind of look physically ugly, maybe. And I love the whole, is it Quanto thing, where he kind of almost goes into a trance and opens up his stomach, and the little guy kind of comes out.
Yeah,
that's really cool. Great Rob Bottin effects.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the thing. Technically, the creepiness of it. It's now all of that would look totally seamless, and the CGI, whatever they thought wasn't working. But there's a weird uncanny valley to a lot of the effects of. There's multiple times where you see a fake Arnold Schwarzenegger head in this movie. There's at least once where you see a fake Ronnie Cox, and at least once where you see a Rachel Ticotin. And I think that, it dates the movie for sure. It was state of the art at the time.
Well, again, though, is it part of the dream? Because you could easily get away with that and say, is he imagining this? So.
Yeah. But I also kind of think it's hilarious to know, like, they were trying at some point to get because when he's pulling the capsule, the tracer capsule out of his nose, that's clearly a fake head. But someone had to make a pretty close fake head of him in absolute agony pulling something out of his nose. Like, that was the thing, the order that was sent to the special effects department. So you got to show him, like, with his, Arnie's huge teeth, like, fully exposed. You got to get those right, because everyone knows what his teeth look like.
And the teeth are, I think, maybe even real teeth. They look really good, the teeth. I was looking at the models when they were doing that. Mm-hmm. They were possibly the best bit. I was also thinking, is that a huge actress they used for when he goes through immigration? Or is that just like an actress standing on a box? I'm not sure.
I think they found a woman. I mean, there's an actress like listed as big woman or something in the credits. So, I mean, people come in all sorts of sizes and shapes. And LA is a big city. I'm sure they found somebody.
That thing, though, what it doesn't spoil it for me, but always takes me out of that a little bit, is that thing that comes out the side of his head when it's coming off is so long. And I'm like, well, I guess that distends, because it would, like, basically spear his real head. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's definitely a point at which the effect on that, it just doesn't make any sense.
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
When they're on Earth, the architecture in the film, I turned to Jamie, because Jamie's always happy to IMDb facts for me while we're watching a movie. And I was like, where did they film this? Because it's not sets. They didn't build sets. This is all real concrete. And, and she said it was all filmed in Mexico City, which I find interesting, because it's all like got this brutalist look, everything on Earth.
It's their subway, their new subway, wasn't it, at the time, I think?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd love to see what some of those, structures actually look like. Yeah,
Well, I
in
think
person.
I once went with my brother, when I first came over here to see, I think the fountain that they used in Logan's Run,
Oh, up in Fort
70s
Worth.
version. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we went, and yeah, I mean, same thing, back in the 70s, I'm sure that looked very futuristic, and now it just looks a bit rubbish. But it works well, I feel like in this film as well, I mean, I guess we see one spaceship briefly,
Yeah.
model, when he's going to Mars. Get your ass to Mars. But yeah, apart from that, it's pretty much on the ground and running around tunnels, really, isn't it? I guess.
Yeah, I think you only see like one tree in the whole movie. Like in the background when he's on the construction site, like there's a couple of plants, but aside from that, it's a I think very intentionally sterile, kind of lifeless environment on both planets.
Yeah.
It's just an interesting look for the movie. There's nothing to make you think, oh yeah, there's a reason to stay on Earth
No,
in the
no.
movie. Um,
And that's very similar to Blade Runner and a lot of other stuff, by the same author.
mhm.
Everything's off world now. Only kind of losers stay on Earth, really.
Yeah.
It's like, well, going back to your creepy thing, I do agree with Johnny Cab. I think he's also got the silliest moment where he short circuits and nearly runs Arnold over for no reason. I feel like that's just like kind of pointless action.
Yeah, it's such a weird, goofy moment. And luckily, it kind of is well placed for kind of a sense of levity right at that moment in the film. Because you need a little comedic relief, I guess, at that moment. And Johnny Cab's been so weird up till that point anyway. And then to find out he's also programmed for murder if you don't pay your bill. It tells you a little bit more about the world that they're all living in.
There's also another bit that made me laugh. I'm hoping it was intentional, where they're mentioning something, and then Michael Ironside suddenly pops up on the phone, like really sinister, and just kind of pans around his head like Max Headroom. And it's kind of like there's somebody at the door, and it's like, it's Michael Ironside shit. Trick or treat. But yeah, no, it's so well done. I mean, we haven't talked about the holograms. And that's really like James Bond. I like how he gets his case of gadgets as well,
Yeah, I kind of wonder. It's a cool effect in the film. It plays well in the ending. I don't know. I guess it was there. It feels very unmotivated. I guess is what I would say. It feels like one of those. Well, this seems extraneous now. Sort of moments when it happens. Because you totally forget about it until that sequence again. And you're kind of like, this could have been used multiple times up to this point in the film, but whatever. It is what it is as part of the film.
Well, a big question kind of like that I thought watching this as well was, would you be the same in different situations? Like if you did have your mind wiped and you were plopped into a totally different job, like, on an oil rig, would you revert to your original personality? Which this seems to play with,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously this is a fictional construct, and I'm not about to get into neuroscience, which I know nothing about.
I think you should.
I mean, I tend to believe we're all a package of both being bags of chemicals that happen to have sticks inside of them that walk around. And so there's some part of us that is pre-programmed through many, many years of evolution and whatnot. But I also think, of course, we're also creatures of circumstance who get imprinted very early on. And I tend to think, so basically what I'm saying is I think a lot of you would start to come back no matter what they tried to lay over on that, because they're never going to get in the million different things that make up who you are. Which is, this movie does not make that argument. They make the argument that, we can just paint over all this, in a 15-minute session.
And it would seem to kind of say as well that Arnie was kind of a good guy. maybe he took the job without really realizing what it was. Because otherwise, if he was total kind of like, piece of shit, he probably wouldn't care about any of these things.
Well, I go with the idea of from that, the video they show of Ronnie Cox and Hauser that he was a complete garbage bag. And
interesting.
That he has been completely rewritten. I don't think that the Hauser Cox video is
edited.
No, I don't. And I also don't think it's like, oh, well, we briefly had him or anything and we reprogrammed him briefly for this video. I think that Hauser was genuinely a really bad guy. And that actually makes the whole Quaid thing more interesting because they accidentally create a hero. With just trying to create an average guy.
Well, with Melina, is it? With Melina, she's kind of like, she says she has kind of like a couple of things that don't really add up, because one of them is like, he changed his mind once she talked to this girl and found out what was really going on. But then,
well, that's what he tells himself. That doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah, but then later on, she's like, well, it seems like they were close. But then another version that I think is said is like, she couldn't stand him, or she kind of couldn't stand how he was before.
Well, I think the thing was, because they all think he's Hauser, right? They don't think he's Quaid.
Yeah.
And so I think he had basically gone undercover and pretended to be swayed by Melina.
Yeah.
And then he just disappears on everybody.
Okay.
And they don't know what happened to him. So when he reappears, it's this whole, where have you been? And he, that we had a lot at stake with you, and we thought you were just assumed you were dead.
Yeah.
And he has no idea who he is. So that's why it's such a shock. And she doesn't, she had a lot at stake, knew what his connections were.
Yeah.
And so of course she's scared to even see him, and then he's acting like a lunatic. So, you gotta
have a safety deposit box in this or any Bourne movie.
Yes. Yeah. So I keep a safety deposit box where I write down everything about who I am and everything I'm about, just in case. I've
got a safety deposit box with you and me doing a podcast, a picture of us doing a podcast. Just to remind me.
I do wonder, I'll be honest, I've been blogging since like 2003. So now you're talking like 17 years of blogs. And now we've got podcasts. And every once in a while I'm like, given the right algorithm, could you reconstruct me at least, some AI
you could probably do a good 60-70% version, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, at least a voice, like Jarvis type thing.
It'd be interesting.
Yeah.
One day. And that's why I don't mind, like, all of this stuff is like kind of lives on Google, and I'm like, that's fine. Because maybe one day Google's going to go ahead and make a Ryan AI that's going to like live on. It might not be entirely right, but it'll be out there.
That's true. What if it's like Skynet? It's evil.
Well, I mean, just like Ryan. So.
Anybody who doesn't like Superman comics has to be news, basically. We're going back to, so we were talking about the violence in this. I do love the fact that not quite as crazy as RoboCop. I don't know if I ever told you, but I never saw the uncut version of RoboCop until the early 2000s when it came out on DVD in England, because they censored it. So I remember me and a friend buying RoboCop and him staying over one night, and I was watching it with glee and a couple of drinks, and watching the bit over and over where Murphy gets his hand blown off, which we've never seen before. And I feel like, this isn't quite as nuts, but I do absolutely love the fact where Arnie uses that poor guy as a human shield on the escalator. And it just goes on and on and on. It's a bit like the Ed 209,
Yeah. Every time I watch this movie, I think about, and I kind of forget about it after the scene, but I do remember it when I was, I guess, 15, so I would have been, 16 or 17 watching it on VHS with my brother, and we rewound that scene and said, like, this poor mofo. Like, look how many times he gets shot. And then he gets thrown as if he's a piece of luggage, like, down the escalator.
And then trodden on by Michael Ironside. He treads on him on the way out.
Yeah. And then that's a, it's a Paul Verhoeven movie right there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And there's also Michael Ironside's arms, of course.
Yes.
See you at the party, Richter. Although I think he missed. He could have said, "I'll give you a hand."
Yeah. There was definitely another Arnieism that could have been used at that point, but
like Austin Powers, he's just standing there doing them until they're like, "Come on, that's enough."
Probably how it worked. Can you imagine? He had like a writer on set who's like, for every scene, like, what could we say here that's an Arnieism? Like,
oh yeah. Well, I'm very fond of "Screw you, Benny" as well.
Oh yeah,
that's a good one. Yeah, I mean, it's just fantastic. I mean, I really can't think of anything that like doesn't work in it. I mean, I hadn't seen it. I'd seen it a lot more recently than you, probably a couple of years ago when I watched it yesterday. And again, like I always say this, I know, but I was like, I've got to kind of watch Total Recall, before I see Rome. And I wasn't like, I don't want to do it, but I was like, I know this kind of too well, I'm going to half watch this and do something else. And then, of course, I'm sitting there going, this is great, as usual. Which is just, again, a sign of a good movie, I mean, this is peak Arnie, really. I think this and Terminator 2, he was kind of untouchable, really.
It's a long movie, and I was telling you before we started recording, Jamie needed to get up and go do something in the middle of the movie, and she finally was like, stop the movie. And I thought like something was wrong. And I was like, she's like, well, I've got to go do this, but she's like, I was going to wait for a minute for this movie to slow down, and it's not happening. I was like, no, not Total Recall. It just goes.
It does.
But the
and it's in two definite halves as well. There's the half on Earth, and then he leaves for Mars. And also again, it starts with him dreaming, and it ends with, is this a dream? So it's got a wonderful, kind of circular kind of like plot as well.
It does, and it does, and the dream is the other thing that makes me never sure about what's actually happening with this thing.
Yeah,
because you're just as like to say, oh well, he's been dreaming about this brunette, so that's who he put into his program.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's kind of the greatness of the film. Well, I think it's a little better and a little smarter than a lot of its contemporaries.
Well, I was also thinking, Verhoeven. I'm obviously massively biased, but I was thinking, I don't think I've ever seen a Verhoeven film that's not entertaining. I can't quite say he hasn't made a bad film, because I think Showgirls is definitely a bad film. But that might be his only bad film. I mean, which, even if you stack him against Spielberg or Hitchcock, I think that's probably a higher batting average than them. I mean, even Showgirls, I gotta have more ice for the nipples, is incredibly rewatchable, even though it's terrible. But like, really, yeah, he very, very, very rarely does a bad movie. And I think he injects, like RoboCop, which, we're way overdue doing as a podcast, because I know that's your favourite. With RoboCop, there's a lot more thought going on, bubbling under the surface of what in other people's hands would be a bulk standard action film.
I agree. I think that the difference between him and like Spielberg or Hitchcock, he's just way more niche. I mean, there's just no getting around that.
Yeah.
He's as wide of an audience as I think is possible for what he does.
Yeah.
Because he still plays a bit to the popcorn mentality. and people can kind of watch RoboCop as just kind of a super cop sort of movie with, and not get any of the satire.
Yeah.
And, with certainly, when you start talking about like Starship Troopers,
oh yeah,
that's you.
That's on two massive levels. Really.
Yeah, two very different movies happening simultaneously. That's a hard thing to do, but it's Starship Troopers, though. You can tell just by the fact that people still talk about that movie 20 years later, which was not ever all that popular.
Yeah,
but it's
even stuff like Hollow Man, which wasn't 100% successful, and I know he had stuff cut out that he wanted to put in, like the poem Hollow Man. But I mean, he was obviously trying to say that if you were kind of given unlimitless power, a bit like a superhero, what would that do to your personality? Would that corrupt you?
And I think that's what he's fascinated with. I think he's, and he kind of, there's all the stories about Verhoeven, kind of growing up during World War II in the Netherlands.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I was going to mention earlier, whenever somebody kind of dragged him over the coals about violence in his films, he said, well, when I was a little school kid, I used to go to work in the rubble of the bombings, and there'd be people's heads on the floor, detached from bodies and arms and stuff. And it goes, so, if you're worried about RoboCop, you haven't really got your priorities straight.
Yeah. And I think he's a guy who kind of sees the world through a certain lens that's very insightful, and he tries to share that kind of with a mass audience. I mean, I think Spielberg does too. I think Spielberg has his moments. He
I'm not dissing Spielberg. I'm just saying.
No. I am well aware you are not dissing Spielberg. But he's just Verhoeven's just such an interesting guy to be working in Hollywood at all, to have worked in Hollywood.
And I think he does bring that European sensibility, which is very interesting. It kind of he can look at American things with fresh eyes and say, "Isn't that silly?" or "Isn't that weird?"
And I think you got a little bit of that if you go back and watch like a Fritz Lang movie, and some of the other guys who kind of left Europe, and Lang left because Nazis, and so when they got to the U.S., they may have fallen in love with it, but they definitely had an ability to see, like, you guys have kind of a dark undercurrent going on here that you do not talk about. And thus the noir movement, right? They're responsible for a lot of that. Hitch, sure.
Psycho,
Yeah. So, and definitely understanding the American male in something like, Vertigo. So, it's a great point of view to kind of bring to these things. And it's weird that it ends with, the whole thing's about, this who controls the means of production, on Mars, and you could even take the movie into that sort of territory of what are we keeping people from, if you think about American coal mining towns and all that sort of stuff and our history there of production. And
it's like you said about the reality TV with the Running Man earlier. I was actually watching this yesterday and thinking, I can see people charging for air and actually putting the price up to get what they want. I can see that happening now. In the 80s, I couldn't see that. That was like ridiculous.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, somebody would do that.
Well, I mean, the people who own Nestle every once in a while come out and say something about owning water and get everybody real twitchy, all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a possibility. It's definitely the reason there are mutants is because they used the absolute worst glass, cheapest glass to build the domes, when they could have protected people.
Yeah.
And now you're multiple generations in and you have these side effects. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on in Total Recall.
Let's got the old the old standard from 80s movies as well of the again the evil corporation, and the and the good people live in the shanty towns, kind of,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, it's absolutely left over from kind of the working man hero, and that is what Quaid is in this movie. Is he's goes from being one of those people to forgetting all about that, and now he's a construction worker who has dreams of like, things could be better. So
yeah. I have to mention one last thing. I think I've said pretty much everything I can think of, but so this cost 50 million and made 260 million, so it was a big hit.
oh, and Schwarzenegger had all those percentage points.
Yeah,
Holy cow!
he was loaded up. I mean,
Yeah.
that guy doesn't need to work for the last 20 years, really. But also, yeah, so amazing score by Jerry Goldsmith.
Uh-huh.
I love the fact that it starts while the Calico sign is still
Mm-hmm.
kind of writing at the start of the movie, and you have that tapping going with the hammers, do 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 do, very kind of reminiscent, but totally different from Conan the Barbarian, I think. Um, and I've been lucky enough to see Jerry Goldsmith a couple of times in concert doing this, and it always gets a big response. It's a really good score, really good action score, and it kind of also led to a nice relationship between Verhoeven and Jerry Goldsmith until Jerry Goldsmith died in the early 2000s. I think they did Hollow Man together as well, and obviously Basic Instinct. So I think I always got the feeling when I saw Jerry Goldsmith in concert, he always kind of smirked when he kind of said Paul Verhoeven. I think he always found Paul Verhoeven very amusing because he was just like, he's so enthusiastic, he's so crazy. He'll dance around and show you what he means when he's trying to, kill 6 people or whatever. So yeah, so so that was kind of really nice.
Yeah, no, it is a great score, and I meant to say something about it, but we always use the scores as we kind of intro and outro, so you people will hear it. We'll hear it,
Yeah,
but also go to YouTube or Spotify and look up the Jerry Goldsmith catalog.
totally. Well, yeah, so Total Recall. I recommend this 110%. It's amazing, holds up, I think. Like you said, maybe some of the model work definitely does look false, but I mean,
But some of it looks amazing. There's a shot that I still
yeah,
to this day don't know how they did, sweeping around the inside of the pyramid mine.
yeah,
Not a
yeah.
clue how that was done.
And I
So
like the thing with the aliens where they obviously were aliens, but they're long gone, and that's very interesting. It doesn't push that over. It's almost like Chronicles of Mars,
mhm.
the Mars Chronicles. It's like there was this great race once, and that in itself is very interesting. Just teasing that. So yeah, great cast. Everybody's at the top of their game.
I have a theory about the aliens. I know you're trying to wrap up,
No, go on.
but okay. So I don't think they're Martians.
No.
No, I think. I mean, why would this thing exist that wasn't turned on? And there's nobody on the planet.
Mm.
I think that if they wanted to do a sequel, it should have been. This is it's very 2001 sort of thing, right? There's a reason they bury the second
Monolith.
monolith. I almost said obelisk, and I was like, it's not obelisk, Ryan. Monolith on the moon. It's because when humans reach that point in their evolution, now we're ready to start the next phase for them where they get to be an interplanetary species. Right? So I think it's another alien race that says, okay, those monkey things on that planet need oxygen to survive. We will provide the means for that to happen, and we're going to create this reactor, but they have to both be not selfish and do that, not charge for air. They have to reach this planet, right? So what does that mean for them? Now, who knows what else that thing could have triggered when the reactor went. So obviously it's just a thing to create oxygen and create blue skies on Mars in the context of this movie. But if they wanted to do a sequel, which I would not recommend because I agree this is a closed loop of a movie. I think that's where you go with it, not Minority Report.
Yeah.
but it's to me. I've never believed that those were actually the Martians, because there's no other real sign of, cities or anything like that. So,
well, supposedly they did a book adaptation, like a movie tie-in, and had a much less ambiguous ending, where Arnie wasn't dreaming, and also it kind of said that it has something about the fact that aliens had basically been seeding other planets with this technology, and if it was misused, your planet would go supernova. And there was a report somewhere in the story about more planets are going supernova in the galaxy. So obviously they've done it before and it's failed. But yeah, I'm the same. I'm glad they don't delve into that too much. It almost kind of keeps it kind of as realistic as it possibly can.
Yeah.
By just kind of saying, this is almost like we found some dinosaur bones, and it sounds crazy, but there must have been something here millions of years ago. Yeah.
Right.
But we're not going to show it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I think on that, it's fair to wrap this up. But it's been great talking to you about another Arnie movie, and I'd like to push a little further into his film career, a couple of years further down for our next one.
I could delve a bit further. Okay. I'm up for a further delve.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and pitch it now while we're recording. True Lies.
True Lies. Let's do True Lies. Also, ask me when we're going to do the next podcast.
When are we going to do the next podcast?
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. You can drop comments on this podcast and let us know what you think. We do have a Signal Watch Patreon, and if you're so moved, we'd most certainly appreciate your support. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies. You've got to be kind.